Studios of WMBS in Uniontown. He's a political pollster. He's my man. He is Doug Saltzman, who's on the air with the great John McIntyre tonight at 10 on the Pioneer Broadcasting Station of America News Radio 1020 KDK. Look, you and I both love the fact that there's a Republican in the White House, and we both love the fact that here's a guy who's actually helping the coal mining community, something you know a lot about from your neck of the woods. But man, I think he needs to hire you, because that's why you work for the great Arlen Specter. You know how to cross the T's, dot the I's, and tell someone to back off of Twitter. Our president has found himself in a bit of trouble of late, and we'll start with Charlottesville. But before we do that, Doug Saltzman on the Comcast Newsmakers line, what did you make of last night's 72-minute speech in Phoenix?
I found it disappointing, Rob, and the reason I say that because he had such a great speech just the night before when he talked about the new plan to end the war in Afghanistan. It was presidential, and it might seem a little strange to say a president gives a presidential speech, but it certainly was. It was well thought out. Obviously, he stuck to the script. Then last night, it was almost this ranting, blaming the media for condemnation of his comments, on Virginia. And his attempt to blame other people for why there was such a negative response to his comments, blaming both sides for what happened in Charlottesville. So I was disappointed that after such a good speech the night before, this one, of course, has grabbed all the attention.
Listen, you had Ben Carson speaking. You had Franklin Graham, the son of the great Billy Graham. You had the niece of Martin Luther King there, Elvira King, and Michael Pence, our vice president, saying President Trump believes with all of his heart that love for America requires love for all of his people. He also spent a very lengthy time talking about his response when it came to Charlottesville. Did you buy it, and is it good enough for you?
I bought it. I don't think it's going to be good enough for the American people at this point, given just at times, he's like on a bell curve with speeches, and I voted for the guy, and I like him. However, when you have a nice, clearly stated, tempered speech one day, and then you have this campaign-style speech the next day, he's not running for office anymore. He's in office. Now comes the time when you have to start governing, and governing regularly. And I think, and the polling has shown this, that people question his abilities at times based on the way, not even necessarily what he might say, but at times the way he talks.
Charlottesville, by the way, in the headlines today, they found black fabric big enough to shroud two controversial Confederate statues, and the covers could take place by week's end. Now, James Clapper, former director of national intelligence, said today he questioned President Trump's fitness for office. Doug, he also told CNN's Don Lemon he's wondering about his motivation for it. He denounced the president's behavior and divisiveness and complete intellectual, moral, ethical void. That's a whole lot of vocabulary for simply saying he doesn't have much love for the guy in the Oval Office.
No, he sure doesn't. And that's a powerful person to be saying such a powerful comment. And that can't be good when you have someone at that level willing to say such a strong statement about the commander-in-chief. I mean, it literally is almost questioning his stability, which is worrisome, and that certainly is going to be read by leaders across the planet, that a former person of that level, an intelligence officer at the peak of power, would say that about the current commander-in-chief. It's worrisome, and it's something that's going to need to be addressed. Those type of comments need to be addressed by the White House and its staff.
Don Lemon, CNN anchor, called the speech unhinged and embarrassing. Now, should we take a look at that, and a hard look at that, or is that just CNN, who really doesn't have either much love for the president?
No, they sure don't. But, again, going back to what I said earlier, he gave such a terrific speech the night before, which at this point most people probably don't even remember, because it was so overshadowed by the bombastic speech he gave last night. And yes, he made some good points in that speech, but of course they're never the ones that people focus on. It's the way he did it, the way he said it, the way it was approached. And you mentioned earlier some of the people who led into his speech. The niece of Martin Luther King, for heaven's sakes, and Franklin Graham. These are the type of people that you want supporting you, and I'm sure they're not the type to give a speech like he did last night. I just wish, and you and I've talked about this before, I just wish the president would act at times more presidential.
As he did in that speech at Fort Bragg on Afghanistan. We carried it live on News Radio 1020 KDK, and I was in studio, and I'm just thinking, this guy is hit it out of the park. Why can't we get more of this? And hopefully people like John Kelly will lead him down that path. One other thing I want to talk about, I voted for her, and the guy who you are on the air with tonight was a big fan of hers as well. But Morning Joe host Joe Scarborough, MSNBC, Hillary Clinton dropped by to talk about her new book, What Happened. She talked about then-candidate Donald Trump's attempts to intimidate her during the presidential debates made her skin crawl, and that she wanted to tell him to back up, creep. Quote, what would you say to just simply staying calm, keep smiling, and carry on as if he weren't repeatedly invading your space? I mean, that's a big statement to sell books, but when you start throwing in those words like back up, creep, I mean, what's happened here in the world of politics, and especially on the campaign trail at such a high level for the highest office in the land?
Right, but I think what you said at the first is the accurate point there. She's trying to sell a book, and if you want to get attention, you don't just be bland about it and talk about how, you know, I felt uncomfortable around my opponent in the presidential race. That's not going to sell a book. Calling him a creep and saying back up because he was standing behind her, that's almost silliness. That he was going to somehow assault her. It's just, in my opinion, comments simply to sell a book. And she didn't mean to make those comments, frankly. That book's going to sell and be on the New York Times bestsellers list no matter what she would have said during that interview.
But here's what he does better than anyone else. From WMBS, he is Doug Saltzman. You hear him from time to time with me, on tonight at 10 o'clock with John McIntyre on KDK. This is why we want him in office. Negotiating, the art of the deal. And the U.S. has just started to renegotiate the free trade deal with Canada and Mexico, NAFTA. The president is already warning the talks may fall. The president said, I don't think we can make a deal because we have been so badly taken advantage of. This is why we want him in the office of the presidency. He needs to get back to, and this is what I teased earlier today when blogging about you being my guest, we got to get back to the business of governing.
Exactly, and that's why, and I said it to you on your show back during the campaign when a lot of people, frankly, didn't think Donald Trump was going to be the nominee, let alone the next president. I said, I think someone like Donald Trump enjoys running for president. I'm not sure how much he's going to enjoy governing, and that's what turns me at times, that he needs to focus on this idea of governing and get away from these fiery speeches. Again, today, I think he gave a very good tempered speech to the American Legion in Reno, Nevada, you know, talking about the need for unity. And that's the type of speech the American public wants to hear. Yeah, he's got a base that likes the speech he gave last night, but he needs to reach out to more of the base. And I'm not just talking about winning a re-election perhaps in 3.5 years, but getting the American people together for his legislative agenda. That's how Ronald Reagan did it. He brought people from all sides together, including people like Tip O'Neill, to work together on issues. I just, unfortunately, I don't see that happening at all just yet in the Trump administration.
Listen, if you got some of the old memos from your former boss, the great Arlen Specter, a few books, whatever, maybe you should ship them off to the White House, because I think not just politicians, but we can all learn something from that man's greatness. Doug, thank you very much. Have a great night with John McIntyre at 10 on KDK.
Thanks for having me on, as always. Have a good evening, Rob.
Doug Saltzman, tonight live at Casa de Emmanuel. Again tonight with John McIntyre on KDK at 10. Tomorrow night we're at Jimmy Joe Savage's Legacy Studios talking football with the coaches. We'll be talking to Oakland's coach Ted Arno Jr. along with Mike McKenzie, coaching recently at Weirton, first-year coach at Beaver Local. Also going to talk to Moose Ramsey, who graduated from East Liverpool, fine high school football player and wrestler. He's a police officer here in the city, but he's also the coach of the Wellsville Tigers. And, ladies and gentlemen, Josh Ludwig of the East Liverpool Potters. And Ted Arno drops by for our weekly conversation on life in the National Football League. Good night.